Welcome back to the channel. Someone's going to put in the comments, why is Dr. Prasad wearing a suit? Well, it's because I'm coming from clinic, and so I dress up for clinic, which is what people should do, but has fallen out of favor. I'm back here in San Francisco making this video. I've been doing a lot of traveling lately. I just got back from WashU St. Louis, where this weekend I delivered maybe 5 or 6 hours of lectures on critical appraisal. Those were recorded, they're going to be edited, and I'm going to try to make all of those available on this channel. Now, sometimes people say, hey, I didn't know you were coming to speak at WashU. Well, there's a solution to this. You've got to follow me on the other platforms. Follow me on Vinay Prasad's Observations and Thoughts on Substack. You put your email in and it'll be up to date with sort of my thoughts on a week-to-week basis. Follow me on Instagram and follow me on Twitter. And somewhere there, I hope to tell you what I'm doing in the future and if it's near you. Today, I'm going to talk about a few things on this video. I want to talk about editorials, the lack of taking an editorial stance on the presidential election by the Washington Post and the LA Times. I want to talk about Walinsky winning the Anthony Fauci Award. It's only fitting that Rochelle Walensky wins the Fauci Award. And I want to talk about the National Academy of Medicine and a few other thoughts. So let's get started. So first, WashU. I just got back from WashU, and I think it was a really great experience. We covered a lot. We covered artificial intelligence and some of the implications for that. I'm going to try to make that available in terms of an audio podcast on a plenary session. We talked about critical appraisal of seminal studies in oncology and medicine broadly, and we kind of alluded to the biggest failure, which was during the pandemic, we didn't have enough critical appraisal of some of these core and life-altering policies that were set by experts who did nothing to see if they worked or didn't work, and they did nothing to test their validity, and they did nothing to ensure the public that these were guided by scientific principles rather than naked partisanship and the desire to control others. Mark Andreessen, the venture capitalist here in the Silicon Valley, has a tweet where he shows that trust in doctors and hospitals has plummeted. Used to be something in the 70s and 80s, now it's down in the 30s. And many people lament that. But one of the points I want to make is that doctors and hospitals lost that trust for good reason. They mandated mask mandates in toddlers when there was no data for that. They prevented you from seeing dying loved ones when there was no data for that. There is no data for that. They created a whole host of policies. In my hospital, you had to walk in one door and walk out the other door, a one-way walking path. This is idiotic. And they never tested it. And actually, they still continue that policy to this day. I don't know why they do that. All right. So loss of trust is something that is well-earned and well-deserved. And that relates to the next topic. A lot of people are hand-wringing because the Washington Post and the LA Times departed from tradition and failed to make an endorsement for a presidential candidate. They didn't tell you who you should vote for. Well, I think we all know who the LA Times wants you to vote for. You can know that by the content that they publish and their extreme skewed view on op-eds. We all know who they want you to vote for. And in news covers that's come out this week, it's the owners of both papers, Jeff Bezos, who owns the Washington Post, and Patrick Soon-Shiong, who owns the LA Times, who specifically said, we don't want you to make a presidential endorsement. I have many thoughts. One, Patrick Soon-Shiong. He's the guy who actually developed albumin-bound paclitaxel, or Abraxane, nab-paclitaxel, which is a Me Too drug for paclitaxel, which is from the bark of the Pacific yew tree, a taxane which has been in use for many, many decades now. And his Me Too drug was marketed as Abraxane, as a better alternative to the older drug, but it's actually not better. In multiple head-to-head randomized control trials, it fails to outperform paclitaxel, most famously Rugo et al. In 2015 in breast cancer when they dose on the same schedule. So I actually don't think Abraxane was ever worth that kind of money. It has a very narrow use, which is you can skip some steroid pre-medication. Okay, anyway, that's how he got his money. Bezos, of course, we all know how he got his money. Amazon, which people are all critical of, but everyone I see who's critical of it is still getting their Amazon packages dropped off on their front doorstep. And both of these people purchased these papers, and both of these papers clearly lean left. And it comes out in reporting that Bezos a few months ago invited the publishers, the editorial staff, the editorial leadership of Washington Post to his house in Miami, had some dinner parties. The Patrick Soon-Shiong, that's not fully reported. Stats reporting that he's in talks with Trump to have some role if Trump were to be president. So they're insinuating that's why he doesn't want to make an endorsement. With Bezos, it's not clear. Bezos clearly litigated the Trump administration because they denied a $10 billion contract for Blue Origin. Bezos His politics is unclear. He's a little bit more opaque. And Bezos said in these, what's been reported from these meetings, he doesn't think the Washington Post should take a stance on this issue. I actually think that newspapers shouldn't endorse presidential candidates for a few reasons. One is, it actually doesn't change any votes. Okay, isn't the first question whether or not you should be vocal about politics? Are you actually changing any votes? What's the point of crying in an empty forest if no one's listening? It makes no sense. So if newspaper editorials and editorials taking a stance on who to vote for in the presidential election don't actually affect the outcome of the election, well then who the hell cares if they do it or not? And that to me is the crux of the issue. Now, to my knowledge, we don't have great studies measuring the direct impact of whether or not newspapers of the circulationship of Washington Post and LA Times impact elections. We do have a very nice study in Nature Human Behavior about whether or not Nature, the medical journal endorsement of Biden in 2020, did anything to change the vote. And that paper shows that it did nothing to change the vote and only resulted in loss of trust in people who supported Trump in the journal Nature. That's really bad. Scientists shouldn't forfeit their credibility and actually do nothing of value. Only an idiot would do that. I see that The Economist, who won the Nobel Prize this year, Damon, I'm going to mispronounce his last name, Acemoglu, he and several other Nobel Prize-winning economists have signed a letter in support of Kamala Harris, telling you should vote for Kamala Harris because they agree with her economic policies. Again, if they're such good economists, why don't they ask themselves a simple economics question, which is if 24 Nobel laureates in economics sign a letter telling you who to vote for, does that affect the outcome of any election? Because I think the answer to that question is no one gives a shit what they think. Okay, no one cares what they think. No one cares what the Washington Post editorial staff thinks. Nobody cares what these people think. People have already decided what they're going to do. And the type of person who at all could be persuaded by the Washington Post probably is already going to vote for Kamala Harris. You know, they are not the type of person, the reader of the Washington Post, who's like, I'm on the fence. Oh, they told me the answer. Oh, okay. You know, get out of here. So first of all, it's disingenuous that anyone actually cares what these people do. Two, people are getting quite theatrical, imagining far-fetched theories why this is the case. It's probably very simple. In Bezos' case, he says that this is just going to make us more of a political lightning rod. People will increasingly see us as a partisan paper. Let's not bother doing that. In Patrick Soon-Shiong's case, it might be a little bit of that, but also some personal interest. Maybe he does want to roll in the Trump administration, and maybe Bezos actually does want to have some favorable treatment for the Trump administration. But either way, who cares what their real motivation is when the actual action doesn't change any actual outcome? I think people have lost their mind to care. It seems to be the number one thing news reporters care about. They have nothing better to care about. News reporters. They're not doing a good job lately. All right. So my overall thoughts on this is Bezos, who bought the paper, who's been funneling his own money into helping the sinking and failing Washington Post, because if it weren't for his injection of $50 million in capital each year, that paper would have gone belly up a long time ago. He tells them, don't take a stance that's not going to change any votes and maybe alienates us from some readers, and people get upset at Bezos? That doesn't make much sense to me. Don't take a stance if it's not going to do anything. Don't say something if you're not going to change anyone's mind. It's pointless. You might as well go off into the forest, find a place where no one's listening, and say whatever the hell you want. It's equally useful. And of course, only a crazy person would do that. Speaking of things that are completely illogical and make no sense, the Infectious Disease Society of America, the IDSA, has awarded Rochelle Walinsky the Anthony Fauci Award. Yeah, you heard it here first. Rochelle Walinsky wins the Anthony Fauci Award. On Vinay Prasad's Observations and Thoughts, which is drvinayprasad.com, I have an essay entitled Walensky Wins the IDSA Award. Until public health is honest, no one will trust it. And really the essay probes the key question, which is, the reason nobody trusts public health is that even now, as I said in a little viral clip that went a little viral on Instagram, the Z-Dog posted, they're just still lying. They're still not honest. Public health and related establishment groups are still dishonest about what happened in the pandemic. They are actually saying Rochelle Walensky did a good job. You have to be completely, I'm trying to choose my word carefully, completely off your rocker to think Rochelle Walensky did a good job. Here are a few examples of what she did wrong. I detail in my essay. 1, Reuters. April 27th, 2021, the headline reads, "The U.S. CDC has not seen a link between heart inflammation and COVID-19 vaccines." That was clearly a lie. That's quoting Rochelle Walinsky saying there's no link between mRNA vaccines and myocarditis. Of course, there was a huge link. It was reported by Israel, 1 in 3,000 safety signal in young men as early as February. There's no possible way. I just don't understand how they could have actually looked at end of April and actually found no link. Because soon thereafter, there suddenly was a link. And it's not a small link. It's an obvious link. You have to be derelict in your duties to not see that link. She denied it. And then she obfuscated. She pushed. She said, well, there's nothing we need to do differently. We still need to give 2 doses to 12-year-old boys on that 21-day and 28-day schedule. She could have spaced out the doses. She could have lowered the doses. She could have omitted dose 2. She could have omitted doses in kids who've already had COVID. She could have done anything to lower the risk of myocarditis without throwing in the towel on vaccination. I mean, the other thing she could have done is just say they don't need to be vaccinated, which might have been quite sensible. I think is quite sensible in that age group. But even if she didn't want to do that, she could have done all these other things to protect those young men. She did nothing of the sort. It was almost as if she was indifferent to the harms that her own policies were causing in a group of people that, frankly, never faced much risk of COVID-19 anyway. Walinsky constantly lied about masking. In fact, I'm not even sure there's a single truthful statement that she's made on the topic of masking. She famously went in front of Congress and when asked, you told 2-year-olds to wear a cloth mask. Your guidance at CDC made parents whose 2-year-old didn't wear a cloth mask on an airplane. Some of them got thrown off airplanes. Maybe the kid had autism, but the parent was thrown off the airplane. That's your policy. Why did you never test your policy in a randomized study? She said there's no equipoise. In other words, there's no genuine uncertainty in the professional community that that policy was uncertain, meaning everyone thought it worked. That's so dishonest when the European CDC specifically said, don't mask any child under 6, and the U.S. said 2 and up. There certainly is equipoise for 2 to 6, and there's equipoise far beyond that. There's equipoise in adults because there's 3 randomized trials in adults. There's equipoise at all ages. She either doesn't know what equipoise is or she's willfully lying. I find it hard to believe she had a career at Harvard not knowing what equipoise is. That's another error. She supported vaccine mandates. She supported vaccine mandates and firing nurses who got and recovered from COVID-19 at work in pursuit of a vaccine mandate for a vaccine that she knew didn't stop transmission. And she definitely knew that at the time. She had data from Provincetown. She pushed boosters in low-risk populations even though she knew that Marion Gruber and Phil Krause at FDA resigned over that very issue. Her communication on TV was a constant mess of flip-flopping and uncertainty. They even hired consultants to help her communicate better. And I think you can look up, I think I read figures like it was $30,000 in such consulting payments. So I'm not sure she actually got anything right. I mean, the only things I can tell that she got right was she thinks COVID is a virus and COVID is bad in older people. I mean, she got some very basic things right, but I'm not sure. I think you could have picked perhaps any top high school student, top 10 percentile high school student, and they would have done a better job than Rochelle Walinsky. I truly believe that. Her performance is so bad. So to me, to give her an award for perhaps one of the worst performances ever is absolutely appalling. But the award is the Anthony Fauci Award, so maybe it's fitting, because Anthony Fauci, of course, famously got many things wrong and did great damage. One he got wrong was when DeSantis wanted to reopen schools in the spring of 2020. He didn't. He exaggerated the risk to kids. He kept saying MISC. He probably said MISC perhaps more times than children actually had MISC. He was wrong about giving 2 doses to fewer people rather than 1 dose to more people. He was wrong to delegitimize and dismiss the authors of the Great Barrington Declaration. He was wrong about double masking. He was wrong about mandates, wrong about ignoring natural immunity. He was wrong about boosters for young people. And most famously and most notably, it appears that he and his surrounding network are trying to evade Freedom of Information Act requests by using Gmail and other ways to avoid public record keeping for his actions. And maybe ultimately we will find the smoking gun. I think we've kind of already found it, that the origin of the virus was in the Wuhan laboratory, a laboratory that his NIAID funds kept open. So I think that's kind of the problem here. So Rochelle Walinsky wins the Fauci Award, in my opinion, for clever and effective propaganda at a time of crisis that polarized a nation and undermined faith in science. That's how I would introduce the award. But to me, it's really bad that IDSA is so dishonest. And they're not dishonest. I think they're an extremely captured far left medical institution, like the American Academy of Pediatrics, the IDSA, the American Psychiatric Association. These are medical professional organizations that really are operating from a far left ideology. And of course, that's the root of their rot. They can't think clearly because they're so nakedly partisan. The only way to think clearly as a scientist is to rid yourself of partisan thinking, to sometimes realize that people can be right on both sides of the political spectrum. That's the only way to rid yourself. They're not capable of doing that. There's one other thing I wanted to talk about that this reminded me of. It'll come back to me, I hope. But in the meantime, the last point, the National Academy of Medicine. I saw another list of the inductees into the National Academy of Medicine. Oh, I remember that point. I'm going to write my note down here to mention it. The inductees to the National Academy of Medicine. I'm going to make a post on this. It looks like to me, since 2020, every single person who commented on COVID-19 policy who was inducted into the National Academies of Medicine, which is a prestigious medical organization, was somebody who was a crazy COVIDian who said mask toddlers and boost adolescents who had COVID, said crazy shit. Those are only the people who were inducted in the organization. People who said, hey, maybe lockdowns don't work. Hey, maybe we shouldn't close schools for kids. Hey, maybe masking kids doesn't make sense. Hey, maybe we shouldn't be boosting young men and putting their heart at risk. Hey, maybe we shouldn't be giving vaccines to people who had COVID. Those people are not being inducted into the National Academies, which tells me the National Academies is a lot like the AAP, a lot like IDSA, just a broken and captured organization. And we have a paper in peer review where we actually took all of these professional organizations, we took their statements and we put it into ChatGPT and said, code this politically. And they said that these were all extreme left ideas from these organizations for the most part. Now, some people criticize me and say ChatGPT is itself on the political left. Sure, yes, it is. Okay. But my point is that if it is also saying that these organizations have a leftward bias and it's also biased in that direction, well, then surely that finding is true that they have a leftward bias. If anything, it might be worse than ChatGPT thinks it is. Okay. So, that's the point. That's my counter-argument to that. The last thing I want to talk about. I've had a number of people tweet at me and say that, every once in a while I say Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has a point, because he often does have a point. The FDA is captured and doing a poor job. He often does have a point that the safety and efficacy of novel drug products is not good enough. He often does have a point that Americans have poor metabolic health, that our food supply is terrible. He often does have a point. We're not really careful enough about environmental pollutants. So he often does have a point. And when I say that, somebody says to me, well, here's something he said that was wrong. And they find something he said that I tend to disagree with, And there are, I've written about this for Unheard magazine. I don't agree with everything he says. Sure. And then they say, why are you promoting this guy? He's doing a lot of damage. I said, well, the things I said he said right, he did say right. I'm not saying that the thing I disagree with, I'm not saying that's right. The thing I agree with, I'm saying he's right about that. And whether you like someone or not, we should all be honest enough to say when you agree with someone, even if there's someone who on some other issue you disagree about. And then they say, but he's doing a lot of damage to public health and trust in science. And I say, no one has done more damage to public trust in science than Rochelle, Walensky, Anthony Fauci, Ashish Jha, Bob Califf, Peter Marks, the establishment, the IDSA, the CDC, the American Academy of Pediatrics. These organizations are supposed to not get things wrong, like should a 2-year-old wear a cloth mask except for when they nap side by side in daycare. They have to be held to the highest standard. They got things obviously and blatantly wrong. They've done more to damage public health than all the Joe Rogans, Weinsteins, and RFKs in the world. It's not even a question. There will always be people outside of power who have opinions about what people are doing, and some of those opinions will be right, and some will be wrong. And they'll always be talking, and there's nothing we can or can't do about it. But the establishment, the people who set the policies, they have to strive to get things right. They need to do studies. They need to course correct. They have to admit their errors. They need to be held to the highest standard. So to me, it's no contest. Fauci did much worse damage than RFK could ever have done, even acknowledging that some of his things he says, I think, are incorrect. And I disagree with him on some things, particularly routine childhood immunization and the like. But on regulatory capture, on the COVID-19 vaccine, on the FDA being a corrupt entity that needs to be, entirely sort of renovated from a gut rehab job, I completely agree with him. And I wish him well in that pursuit. And so I think that's honest. Now, let's go to Rochelle. What do I agree with her on? I guess I agree with her that COVID is a virus. COVID is not caused by 5G. That some people, older people, particularly in the first quarter of 2021, did benefit from vaccination if they hadn't already had COVID. That's what I agree with her. What I disagree with her on is on all of the more interesting and substantive things. The places I agree with her on are, pretty obvious things. I would expect anyone with an ounce of sense to, agree with those things. But overall, I think the damage she did, it's not even close. 100-fold what any of these commenters could ever have done, because she actually ran the goddamn CDC. Are we missing that? Forget that. Why won't the Washington Post put out an editorial that says Rochelle Walinsky did more? No, I mean, we can complain about all these editorials. Ridiculous. Why don't they put out an editorial in a presidential election that doesn't matter? Ridiculous. All right. Those are my thoughts. Sort of a random assortment of thoughts coming back from WashU. I hope to put those critical appraisal videos out there. There were some really great discussions about case control studies, and, they illustrate why I hold some of my views on COVID-19 policy when we talk about some of the methodologic pitfalls of some of these studies. I think it'll be a good discussion, and I'm trying to think of other videos that I'm going to put out there that are interesting. I think this AI talk that's coming out on plenary session is really good. There's a 3-part series on sensible medicine, which is sensible-med.com, where Adam Sifu, John Mendrell, and I answer reader questions. I think it's a terrific piece. Check that out. And most importantly, go to drvinayprasad.com. Give me your email, subscribe, become a free or paid subscriber. Your subscriptions is what keeps this going. But become a free subscriber just so you can keep track of where I'm going and speaking. I'll try to send out posts there. Follow me on Instagram. Follow me on Twitter. And then people will know when I come to your town and give a talk, because this was actually open to the public, the WashU talk, and some people were angry that they missed it. All right, until next time.